Okay, well, this morning we are starting a new three-part Sunday message series based on Jonathan Livingston Seagull, written, of course, by the wonderful Richard Bach, the New York Times bestselling author, Richard Bach. In fact, this particular book, when it was first published in the early 1970s, it was on the New York Times bestseller list for 2 years. And of course, it has continued to keep millions of us inspired ever since. Now, if you're inspired by Jonathan Livingston Seagull, give me a thumbs up in the chat box over here. If you're one of us, if you're one of those. Now, as I mentioned over the last couple of weeks, one of the reasons that I chose to do a series on this particular book is because every time it's mentioned, one of you chimes in and lets me know that you would love to have a series on this. So here we are, and here we go. Now, one of the first things that I want to share with you about this book is a fun fact, and here it is. Did you know that Jonathan Livingston Seagull was one of Kobe Bryant's favorite books? In fact, it was his favorite book. It's true. Now, I know that this is a favorite for many of us, but since Kobe is an extraordinary basketball legend who passed away, of course, just earlier this year, just a few months ago, I thought this was worth mentioning. And the way that we know that this was his favorite book is because back in 2017, when the Chargers moved back to Los Angeles from San Diego, Kobe went to speak to them on their very first day of training. And while he was there during a Q&A, one of the Chargers players asked him, "What's your favorite book?" And Kobe said, "Jonathan Livingston Seagull." And then he went on to talk about what it means to strive to be better every day of your life. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's awesome. Even though it absolutely was not what the Chargers were expecting Kobe to say, but it impacted them so much that later on, one of the players said that that very day, like half the team went out and ordered the book because Kobe said it was his favorite book. And so one of the reasons that this story resonates with so many of us is because the main character, Jonathan, is indeed a seagull. And most of the story, most of the plot points actually take place in the air, in the sky, which allows us the ability then to take in its deceptively simple spiritual lessons about flying and apply them to any circumstance in our lives, like what it means to strive to be better every day of your life, like that. And so from this perspective, we all have a little or a lot of Jonathan within us, right? I mean, you are Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I am Jonathan Livingston Seagull. So you know what's coming next. Let's say it together. I am Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Let's say that again. I am Jonathan Livingston Seagull. One more time. I am Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And so today we are going to take a look at some of the highlights from part 1 in my talk titled "It Was Morning." Now, there's no deep meaning in this talk title. Actually, it's the very first 3 words of the story. But if I were going to give it a subtitle, which I never have the space to do out on our sign in front of the church. But if I were going to give it a subtitle, it would be this: A Lifetime of Screeching for Fish Heads? No thanks. Lifetime of Screeching for Fish Heads? No, no thank you. Why? Because we learn on the very first page of part 1 that Jonathan was no ordinary bird. And while most gulls only care about one thing and one thing only, eating, Jonathan loved to fly. He loved it so much that he completely defied his parents and he practiced flying anyway. But his small victories for setting speed records for seagulls were short-lived. Like the time he exploded mid-air and he smashed down into the sea so hard it knocked him unconscious. And when he came to, it was well after dark, and the weight of his wet feathers and the weight of another failure was really bringing him down, and he considered ending it all. And that's when the voice of his inner critic kicked in. You know that voice? The inner critic? Here's what it said. My parents are right. I have to forget this foolishness about flying high and fast. I am a seagull just like every other seagull. What was I thinking? I'll just fly like all the other seagulls and eat like all the other seagulls, and I'll just be another one of the flock. And so Jonathan pulled himself together, and although he was in pain, he was also really quite relieved that he wasn't going to have another bout of failure to deal with. So, as he was flying back to shore in the black, the inner critic decided to take another swipe. Seagulls never fly in the dark. Get down. I mean, if you were meant to fly in the dark, you'd have eyes of an owl. You'd have charts for brains. And you'd have falcons' short wings. Get down. And just like that, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. And by the way, this is my absolute favorite scene in the entire story of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, because in that moment, in the blink of an eye, in that very instant, everything did change. All of a sudden, Jonathan's pain and his self-doubt and his vow to just be another one in the flock completely transformed in that instant, because he dared to think about it differently. And he thought, short wings, that's it. That's the answer. All I need to do is to fold my wings in. That's it. That's the answer. Now, a quick sidebar here. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul says it this way: do not be conformed by this world, but be transformed by what? By the renewing of your mind. And that is exactly what is happening here. In that aha moment, in that blink of an eye, in that instant, Jonathan's unbridled decision to expand into the seagull that he was born to be, it's in this moment that this really takes flight, and his life was never the same again. This is the flash in which he knew that he knew that he knew that there was something greater within him that was wanting to emerge from him. He could feel it with everything that he was, and he had to go for it. He had to go for it. Now, does this mean that he didn't experience any turbulence along the way? No. Does it mean that as he discovered, how to do loops and rolls and spins, that he did it flawlessly the first time? No. Does it mean that when he reached 214 miles per hour, creating a breakthrough in one single moment and made history for all seagulls, does that mean that he did it without lots and lots of trials and tribulations and practices? No, of course not. But none of these struggles really mattered, because Jonathan was ecstatically joyous about being able to share these breakthroughs with the other gulls. And he thought, now we can lift ourselves up out of ignorance, right? We can be free. We can learn to fly instead of just slogging back and forth from fish boats. You know, I also just have to hit the pause button here for a minute, because this part of Jonathan's story reminds me so much of that powerful teaching from Rumi. Do you know the one? You were born with potential. You were born with greatness. You were born with wings. You're not meant for crawling, so don't. You have wings. Learn to use them to fly. Yeah, you have wings. Learn to use them and fly. And so, my precious ones, one of the greatest takeaways from this little book is that you are not meant for mediocrity. Oh, no, 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 no. That is not for you. You are meant for greatness. Yeah, you. Are you listening? I'm talking to you. You are meant for greatness. You were made in the image and the likeness of God, and you already have coded within you the potential to become the ever greater version of yourself. You already have this blueprint within you, and you are here to become the best you. You got to do you, boo. And you have to allow it. You just have to let it unfold. Amen? Amen. And so this is the path, of course, that Jonathan is on, to grow into his greatest potential. You know, in order to grow yourself, you got to know yourself, right? In order to grow yourself, you have to know yourself. And this is why we can only imagine then his heartbreak and disappointment when the elders call him to stand center for shame. That's what they call it. Stand to center for shame in front of the entire tribe of seagulls. And so instead of celebrating these amazing accomplishments, instead of doing that, they punish him and they ridicule him. I mean, they just don't get it. They do not get it. And they say things to him like, you violated the dignity and tradition of the Gull family. And they told him that he had been reckless and irresponsible. And then they delivered the final proclamation that he would be cast out of Gull society and banished to the far cliffs. Well, it turns out that Jonathan and his newfound sense of self, his newfound sense of buoyancy, just could not be silent on this issue. And so he says to them, irresponsible, my brothers, who is more responsible than a gull who finds a higher purpose for life? For thousands of years we have scrabbled after fish heads, but now we have a reason to live, to learn, to discover, to be free. Just give me one chance so that I can show you what I have found. But the brotherhood of the gulls had spoken, and they would not listen, and they turned their back on him. And so I think that we can all relate to this, right? You know, in some way or another, we all know what it feels like when someone just doesn't get you. Pardon me. You know, like you're speaking two completely different languages, even though you're looking at the very same thing. You see it in two completely different ways. You know, I'm quite certain that even if you can't think of a personal experience in your life when this happened, if you just think about this in terms of the political arena, if you'll just think about it in those terms, you'll have a better understanding of what I'm talking about, because we all look at things through our own filter, and then we wonder why other people don't see it the same way. I mean, and this is why my good friend Deborah has a sign in her office that says, "Wake the flock up." Let me just say that again. Wake the flock up. Amen? Amen. This is also why, by the way, it is so awesome when you meet someone that does get you, right? You know what I mean by this, right? You know, it could be a family member, or it could be a dear friend, or it could even be a coworker. Maybe it's somebody that you work with. It just means so much when you connect and you just know that someone gets you, right? I mean, I think that, you know, this is why the most common feedback I hear when people come into our spiritual community is that they feel loved, that they feel that sense of inclusivity, and they feel like we get you, right? And it takes a lot of courage, I would like to say, to walk through the doors of a church for the first time, or even to join in here virtually, you know, for the first couple of times. And so I want you to know we get you, right? We get you. But alas, this was not the case for our Jonathan and his tribe. And so what he had once hoped for in his own flock, he now gained for himself, because Jonathan learned how to fly. And Jonathan learned how to fly high and fast, just like he knew he was destined to do. And he was not sorry in the least for what he had to pay for it. In fact, and we'll hear more about this in the coming weeks, Jonathan Livingston Seagull went on to live a wonderful life. And so we continue to remember that, you know, we in no way, shape, or form are here to live a challenge-free life. That is not the goal. I mean, look at us right now. We are growing together through a global pandemic. And I say together because we are in this together, right? I mean, we definitely have challenges. But the point of these challenges, through our spiritual practice, through prayer and meditation, is to allow the gifts that we have to be activated, so that that allows us to become more of our true nature, more of our God-given potential, more of our authentic self. That's the point, to go through these challenges, to activate the gifts within us that are wanting to emerge. And so, at the close of part 1 in the book, unbeknownst to Jonathan, one of his greatest adventures of all time is actually just about to begin, because 2 star-bright gulls show up flying next to him in flight, in the air, and they say, "Hey, Jonathan, we're here to take you even higher." Now, at first, he was a bit reluctant, and I think that's because he had gotten a little bit in his own comfort zone. But then he realized that one school had finished, and another school, another flight school, another flight level was ready to begin. And so he said, "Okay, I'm ready." And with that, all three of them disappeared into a perfect dark sky. And so I want to leave you with this. Unity co-founder Myrtle Fillmore wrote this in her book, How to Let God Help You. And if you don't have that on your bookshelf, I sure hope that you will get it. Here's what Myrtle wrote. Life is a school, and all of us sooner or later come to the place in our own development where we are no longer satisfied to go on living the old life without our knowledge of our oneness with God, the source of our being. But just as surely as there is God, the one presence and one power, we shall find that all is well, and that we are but going from one room, as it were, into another larger and lighter room. And so I share that with you because between Jonathan and Kobe and Myrtle, I can't think of a greater example of what it means to strive to be better every day of your life. And so that's your heart work this week, my dear ones. Strive to be better every day of your life, because that's how you become more of you. Boo. And so ends our message for today. Thank you. And God bless you. Thank you.